did look up, I almost fainted because of how close he was, and on top of that, the guy didn't say anything after I did notice him. He gave me this psychotic little grin, and I asked him if he needed help finding something. He shook his head no, and then asked me if anyone else was working right then. This was an immediate red flag, and I lied and said yes, there's a manager and 3 others somewhere around. Then his smile grew, and he said, "Liar," almost to where I couldn't even hear it. Then the awkward silence. He stood there like a psycho, and I eventually had to just look away and tell him I needed to get back to work. I literally couldn't look at him anymore. I was shaking. He was so creepy. When I looked back up again, he was gone. I looked around the store from where I was standing but didn't see him down any of the aisles. I walked out from behind the counter and looked to see if he was crouched down in front of it. No, he was gone. I felt relieved, but also terrified because I knew that he had to have walked out of the store very fast in that amount of time to just vanish like that. I was probably looking away for 10 seconds or less. I was a bit shaken up for an hour or so, but I forgot about it after a while. At 1:45, I started to clean up and get ready to close the store. I finalized the inventory, counted the money, and wiped down the windows and counters. When everything was done, I grabbed my drink, my keys, and my phone and walked over to the door to shut off the lights and lock up. I flipped off the lights and leaned down to unlock the sliding lock on the bottom of the door. When I stood back up, and while turning to go out the door, my eyes scanned over what I thought was a head peering over at me from one of the aisles. I stopped and froze in place, and then slowly looked back over to where I saw it. There was nothing. I wasn't sure that I saw what I thought I did, but I was scared. Then, while I was thinking of my next move, my train of thought was shattered by the man as he crawled out of the aisle on his hands and knees. He knew I could see him, because he started hysterically laughing. I went out the door and violently dialed 911 in the parking lot. I didn't see the man come out, and I circled the block until the police arrived. The man wasn't in the store when they went inside, but they did find his clothes in the aisle he crawled out of. In 7th grade, I needed help with math, and every day after school I met with this girl who was tutoring me. I went to the library where we normally met, but she wasn't there. I sat and waited for a good half an hour before I decided to walk down to the multi-purpose room to see if she was there. I know that she worked there sometimes too. She would help out an after-school band class or something, and they practice on the stage there. I didn't see a single student or faculty member on the way there, which I thought was odd. When I went inside, it was silent. The band wasn't there. Right next to the entrance door, there was a door that led to the stairs that led up to the stage. I opened that door and saw a pair of feet sticking out at the top of the stairs. Someone was laying down up there, I thought. But as I walked up, I had a sudden sickening gut feeling. The feet were twisted in a way that a healthy person just laying down would not do. I climbed the stairs, and when I got to the top, I saw something that no 12-year-old should ever see. It was a body. My tutor, my 13-year-old tutor. Blood was covering her face and her shirt. Her eyes were wide open. The expression left on her dead face, I still see it. Blood was all over the floor, and I felt as if I was actually dreaming for a second. It did not feel real. I turned and went down the stairs, on the verge of screaming at the top of my lungs. I finally ran into a teacher, and between hysterical sobs I told him what I found. The police covered the school 30 minutes later, and I was taken to the hospital for trauma therapy. The girl was stabbed 37 times in her chest, her stomach, and her throat. I've been forced to tell people this story my whole life. When I was 5, my parents went out one evening and hired a babysitter. The woman they hired was very nice to me from what I can remember until I went to sleep. I woke up to her standing in my bedroom doorway, smiling like a crazy person. I started crying, and she told me she was sorry and left the room. I fell asleep crying. I assume it was hours later when I woke up again to her sitting in a chair at the end of my bed. I screamed as I saw her face, which she had twisted into a crazy expression. I began to cry again, and she just held the expression. I covered my head with my blankets and was shaking uncontrollably until my parents came home. I was pretty sure I heard them talking to the woman, and that's when I took my head out of the covers. The woman was still sitting in the chair, making the same disturbing expression. I screamed and cried, and my dad came running into my room. He was livid as you can imagine, and I heard him yelling at the woman as he kicked her out of the house. My parents have always told me she was just trying to scare me. But why? Someone of her age. Why would she do that? When I was 15, I used to babysit for this little girl named Sarah. Her parents were the kind of people who liked to go out every Friday night, so I always babysat for them. But after what happened to us, I no longer babysit for anyone. It was a typical Friday night during the summer. I showed up to Sarah's house around 6 o'clock, and her parents left me pizza money, gave me and their daughter a hug, and took off to go out. Sarah and I were playing Candyland together and scarfing down pizza when the phone rang. I picked it up. Hello? No one responded. All I could hear was the sound of someone heavily breathing on the other end of the phone. I repeated, hello? Then the phone hung up. Wrong number, I assumed. It was now around 9:45, and Sarah had to be in bed by 10 o'clock. I tucked her into bed and turned on her nightlight and closed her bedroom door. I went and sat on the couch and started texting my friends. Within 5 minutes, I heard Sarah's door open, and Sarah comes walking out holding a stuffed animal up to her mouth, and she had huge, wide eyes peeking over it. I asked why she was out of bed. She moved the animal away from her mouth just far enough to say, "There's a man watching me from the backyard." I ran to her room and looked out through her window, but there wasn't anyone out there. As I was looking, the phone rang. We both jumped, and I ran back out and answered the phone and said hello. After a few deep exhales, he said,
"The door isn't locked."
I hung up the phone and ran to the front door and locked it. Holding the phone, shaking, I tried calling Sarah's parents, but no answer. I called the cops, and they came out to investigate, but came up with nothing. The police finally got a hold of Sarah's parents, and they immediately came home. I told her parents I wouldn't be babysitting anymore, and I went home. I don't know if that guy ever called back again, or showed up again, but all I know is that I'm done babysitting. My girl and I frequent the drive-in theater all the time in the summer. I'm not sure if it's different anywhere else, but at the drive-ins closest to us, there's 2 movies that play on a single screen back to back. It's also pretty cheap, so it's an awesome choice for a hot summer night. We were doing our normal thing. We went to the store to get some candy and beer and stuff before heading to the drive-ins to save some money. I'm sure you know the food at the theater is ridiculously overpriced. We made it there about 30 minutes before the first feature started, and people were still showing up and positioning their vehicles. We got to the front row with nobody in front of us, which somehow I always managed to get. After 30 minutes of waiting and munching on junk food, the previews started for the first movie. Everything was completely normal up until this point, and during the previews, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone had kicked a rock at my truck. Not a lot. It just sounded like one good-sized rock hit my tailgate or something. We thought nothing of it because of our focus on the screen. An hour or so went by, with no other unusual sounds, and we were enjoying the movie, when suddenly we both heard something strange. It sounded like somebody was walking right next to my truck and dragging their feet heavily. We looked around, but saw nothing. As I was looking around, I spotted a girl in the passenger seat in the car next to us looking at me. She had a concerned look on her face and motioned for me to roll down my window. I did, and she immediately said, "There is somebody under your truck." This made me feel sick. I knew she wasn't messing with me and didn't know what to say back or what to do. My girl started to quietly freak out, and I asked the girl next to us as quietly as I could what the person was doing, and she said back, "I don't know." I was afraid to get out, and I remembered that eerie feeling that I had when I was a kid, and I didn't want to step off my bed at night for fear of somebody underneath. Same feeling. I decided to call the drive-in's number listed online and told them what was happening. After asking the details of my truck, they said they'd send somebody over to us. Before anyone came, we very suddenly heard more noise under us, and then a girl, wearing a dress, crawled out from under my truck right in front of us and began walking backwards towards the movie screen while looking into the truck. When she got to the screen, she turned and walked away towards the fence that separated our lot from the one next to us. A few minutes later, a man approached my window, and I told him that she had walked away. Nothing else happened. It was so bizarre. I work at a government building downtown. My shift begins at 11 p.m. Throughout the night, I'm the only one here. I sit in a very small room and watch the surveillance cameras that surround the exterior of the building. I've never had to call the director for any reason or incident until this one night. I was doing what I always do, and that's relax. I watch Netflix on my phone. I'd be lying if I said I didn't fall asleep sometimes. Hell, I'd be lying if I said I didn't fall asleep most of the time. This one particular night, I fell asleep 3:15 in the morning. I had a dream that made me wake up abruptly, like those ones where you fall off of something. I couldn't remember the dream as soon as I woke up, and I'm pretty sure my body was just trying to tell me that I needed to wake up for some reason. I reached for my Coke on the desk next to the monitor and froze. On camera B5, which was the hallway leading east from the lobby, was a woman. She was walking slowly and was out of sight in a few seconds. I was confused at first because nobody else should be in the building with me, but then my heart started beating faster when I came to the realization that the hallway leads to me. I looked at the live feed of the next camera that she would pass through, the one showing the room outside my office. I thought to myself how ridiculous this was, that I'm specifically here for this purpose, and I'm too terrified to move. Maybe it's because the woman didn't look usual. Her long hair covered her face. I waited for her to appear in the room, but she didn't. I looked at the feed of the hallway again. Nothing. I looked at every live feed on the monitor, and didn't see her anywhere. I picked up my company phone and called my boss. "Hey Ben, sorry to wake you. I saw a woman on the monitor in the east hallway." He was confused, of course, and told me to do what I hoped he wouldn't. He told me to find her. I hung up the phone and assured myself that I'm the man, and I am here to kick people out that don't belong, and this is my building. I grabbed my flashlight, which was all I had, and opened the door. The woman was not in the room connected to the office, and after making sure, I opened the door to the east hallway. As soon as the door opened, I saw the woman walking fast towards me at the opposite end of the hall. The way she was walking towards me, I opened my mouth to say something, but something made me stop. The way she was walking, it was threatening. I did not want her to reach me. I closed the door. Shit. No lock. I ran back to my office and closed the door, and thankfully, there was a lock on this one. I looked at the monitor and almost fainted. The woman was standing at the door, right outside the door to my office. How did she get here so fast? She was terrifying. Her hair was so long, and she stood at the door facing it like a statue. As I fumbled around the desk grabbing the company phone, I saw her turn around and walk away. My boss told me to find her, and I said I would. I didn't. I didn't leave that office until morning, and I didn't see the woman again. I used to work the overnight shift, often with one other person in my work center. Well, we worked in the basement of a huge complex and would often go outside to smoke, which was a 5-minute journey upstairs and 5 minutes back. One night, we decided to take the elevator for a change. Well, approaching the elevator, we see a gentleman in a red polo waiting at the elevator door. When we were about 10 yards away, the door opened and he walked inside. We entered an empty elevator a few steps behind him. Working at Jack in the Box from 2 to 7 in the morning can definitely have its perks. I can go stand in the back where the sinks are and eat food. Sure, I've gained a little weight, but I don't do it as often as I could. The downside is, it can get kinda scary. I'm in there by myself. On a Friday night, about 6 months ago, I experienced some horror movie shit. This little girl, I'd say about 10 years old, walked up to the drive-through window. I wasn't scared when I first saw her. She is just a little girl after all. I opened the window and asked if she was all right. Even though she looked fine, she was wearing tattered clothes that looked very dirty, and there was dirt on her face and in her hair. She responded to my question with a question. She asked, "Are you all right?" I was a bit taken back because of how fast she responded with the same question, and I laughed a little and said, "Yeah, what are you doing?" She then asked me, "What are you doing?" I immediately felt very on edge right at that moment. I felt like I was being messed with, and possibly some adults were going to pop out or something and try to rob the place. I looked all around and behind her, but I could only see dark, empty parking lot. I didn't feel like humoring this little girl anymore, so I just closed the window and turned around. I was definitely still creeped out, but I pretended to just go back to work and started wiping down the sides of the fryers. I actually did start to forget about it after I'd say 5 minutes, when suddenly I heard tapping on the glass. I turned to look, and she had her face almost pressed against the window. I stood there in utter shock for a second. She stood there, blank-faced, staring at me. I decided to walk over and open the window again. When I did, I asked her, "What are you doing here?" She didn't respond, but instead took a fork out of her pocket. I closed the window again and she tapped it on the glass. 3 of the points on the fork were broken off, leaving just one sharp and incredibly creepy point. I yelled at her that I'm calling the cops, so she needs to get the hell out of here. And then she smiled and ran away. I wish I could say the story has a scarier ending, but I'm telling you, it was scary as hell. So random, and I didn't see her again that night or any other night. My dad used to work nights for the city, spraying weeds and shit. He was spraying pesticides at a graveyard one night, and he said for some reason he just felt terrified suddenly and looked behind him, and like 50 feet away there was this guy sitting on a headstone, just giving my dad the 1,000-yard stare. Apparently my dad tried to ask him what he was doing out there, told him to leave because of all the chemicals in the air, but the guy just sat there, stone still, staring my dad in the eye. He took the rest of the night off and came home visibly shaken up, and he wasn't the type to let that shit show normally. Not saying it was a ghost or anything, just could have been some weird old man visiting his dead wife or something, but the way he described it was just fucking scary.
Good evening, everyone. I've come to join being scared to help let the darkness take control. I have been babysitting since I was 13. I've had more than a few creepy experiences on the job, but this one was the worst that I've ever had. Last year in April, when I was 17, I had every babysitter's nightmare happen to me. I met the family through my grandmother, Laura. Laura lives in a nicer neighborhood. The people are genuinely nice and everyone knows each other. It was a very small subdivision, with a very big highway on one side of it and the woods on the other. One evening, my grandma introduced me to the family that lived across the street who was in need of a babysitter. They were a young couple with their first daughter, Lily. Lily was 3 years old at the time. After talking to them for a while, the family asked me if I could try babysitting Lily. I agreed, and after watching her a few times, the family asked me to stay on as their regular babysitter. Lily, like most 3-year-olds, was a handful, but she was a sweet kid, so I agreed to help the parents out. We set up a schedule where I would come over twice a month regularly for their date nights. This was perfectly fine by me, and as a teen, this was a dream job. Because my grandma lived across the street, we developed a pattern. Every time I babysat, I would park my car at her house and chat to her before I went over to Lily. I would also stop in before I left. My grandma would leave the side door unlocked for me because she would fall asleep sometimes before I got done. A couple of years passed without incident. Lily turned 4, then 5, and became even more of a handful. The night of the incident, the parents left in the early afternoon, and because the sun was still out, Lily wanted to go to the park down the road. I said no initially, because I had no key to lock the door with, but she wore me down with her persistence. I turned a light on in the living room and led her out of the back door. We stayed at the park until it got dark, and I was exhausted by the time we got back to the house. When we got back, nothing looked out of place. I made Lily stay in the kitchen as I made a sweep around the house to check that everything was okay. The only place that I didn't check was the attic, as I was not allowed to go up there. After confirming to her that there weren't any bogeymen in the house, I cooked dinner for Lily. Afterwards, we played in the basement until it was almost bedtime. As the evening progressed, I would occasionally hear creaks and odd clanking noises from the floor above us, but I just brushed that off as the house being old. The family's cat, a very antisocial creature that hated noise, stood near the top of the steps the whole time that we were in the basement. The cat hissed occasionally at nothing. I considered that to be weirder than anything else. Finally, declaring it was bedtime, I let Lily climb onto my back and gave her a piggyback ride upstairs. The way her house was laid out, there was a long hallway in the middle. To the left was Lily's room. To the right, directly opposite Lily's room, was the parents' room. The parents' room had a door on the other side, connecting it to the front hall, meaning the front door. Lily was always proud of being a big girl and sleeping in her own room every night. Tonight, though, she really missed her parents and wanted to sleep in their room. I didn't see this as a problem. It had happened before, and the parents didn't mind. I tucked Lily in and went back to the kitchen to read until her parents got home. The whole time I was in the kitchen, I kept hearing a strange crunching noise. It would last about a minute before stopping, and then a few minutes later would start up again, and the cycle would go on and on. I began walking around the house in search of the noise when I heard Lily starting to cry. Lily normally falls asleep within 5 minutes without much incident, so her crying was very unusual. I walked back to her parents' room and stood in the doorway facing her back to her room. The only light was a small lamp next to the bed that Lily had turned on. "What's wrong, Lily?" I asked, stepping closer. I keep hearing noises. I'm scared." "I know, sweetie, but it's okay. I'm looking for them right now. Hey, do you want to come with me? It'll be like an adventure," I said excitedly, trying to cheer her up. I assumed that the noise was the cat playing with something, but I didn't want to leave Lily upset and alone. I figured that if I brought her, I could turn it into a game, which might help her feel better. I walked towards the bed, my back still to the door, and was about to swing her up into my arms to carry her, when she pointed behind me and said, "Who's that?" I whipped around to see someone big climbing out from underneath Lily's bed. There was something in his hand that glinted in the dim light. He was staring at us. I reached out and slammed the door shut as he lunged through the hallway with a yell. The door had a flimsy lock on it that I clicked into place seconds before the knob started rattling. Lily, understandably, was screaming her head off in panic. Suddenly, the door started shaking as the man began throwing himself at it. I couldn't afford to freeze. The man was at the door leading into the house. Praying that he was acting alone and there wouldn't be a partner hiding elsewhere, I snatched Lily into my arms and ran for the other door in the room that led to the front door. The door behind us kept shuddering. I threw open the bedroom door, knowing that I wouldn't have long to undo the 2 locks on the front door. The shuddering behind us stopped as the man heard us moving. He started screaming at us, running through the inside of the house, going the long ways to the front door. I managed to undo the locks and sprinted across the street to my grandma's without looking back. We made it into the house through the unlocked side door, which I quickly locked behind me. Lily was still screaming, which scared my grandma awake. I handed Lily to her and ran through the house checking the locks. Once I was sure that everything was safe, I ran back to my grandma and told her that we needed to call the cops. My grandma gave me her phone. I went into the living room away from all the noise to make the call. On the phone, the operator I spoke to sent police immediately upon hearing what had happened. She then asked me if I could safely see the house. Carefully pulling aside the curtains, I chanced to peek through the window at the house across the street. The front door was shut, which was not how I'd left it, and all of the lights were off, when I always keep at least one light on. I mentioned this to her, and she told me to stay put. The police arrived in a few minutes and did a search of the area, but by that time the man was gone. They spoke to Lily and I, but we couldn't offer much because we didn't get a chance to see him. When the parents got home and saw the chaos, they were terrified and ran over to us. When I told them what happened, they seemed just as confused as we were. Whilst the police didn't find the man, they did find one thing that he left behind under Lily's bed: a box of mint Tic Tacs. The crunching noise that we heard was him chewing on them whilst he waited for Lily to go to bed. I don't know who you are or what your plan was to do, but let's never meet again. I grew up in rural Michigan and rode the bus to school every morning. We lived in a house at the bottom of a hill on a country road. My bus stop, however, was at the top of the hill after you passed my house. The story I'm about to tell you happened when I was around 8 years old. I woke up one morning and got ready for school just as I usually did, and my bus picked me up around 7 a.m, right when the sun was starting to come up a little, but there were still spots of darkness deep in the woods. I was the only kid who was picked up from my bus stop, so I would stand at the edge of the woods and wait until the bus came. My mum or dad would have to drop me off 5 minutes before the bus came and hightail it to work in order to make it there for 8. It's not that they felt completely comfortable doing this, but they didn't have many options. We lived in a safe area, or so we thought, and the bus arrived on time 99% of the time, so they weren't too worried that anything would happen to me in the 5 minutes I was left alone. So I'm standing there, cold as shit, waiting for the bus to come, watching the sunrise slowly in the sky. It's still a little dark outside, but yet bright enough for me to see what's going on around me. I saw the lights of the bus in the distance on time as usual, and it came to a stop right in front of me. My driver, Mrs. Teresa, opened the door and said good morning, and gestured for me to hop on. I walked to my seat, put my stuff down, but noticed that the bus wasn't moving yet. Mrs. Teresa still had the door ajar, and she just sat there, leaning slightly out of her seat, staring into the woods. After a good minute or so, we were off on our way to school, after picking up a few more kids. Arriving at school, Mrs. Teresa escorted us in, which is something that she never did, and I remember seeing her slip into the office and talking to one of the secretaries. I went through my regular school day, and I was picked up by my dad, as normal. When he picked me up though, he started asking me all kinds of questions. Bus pickup go okay this morning, champ? Did any cars stop or blow the horn at you as you waited? Strange questions that he'd never asked me before. The next morning, my parents did not take me to the bus stop. Mum dropped me off at school before going into work at a later time. This continued alternating as a drop-off for my mum or dad for the remainder of the school year. At the same time, I noticed that they changed my bus stop. Years later, I found out why my bus driver went to school that day, and why my bus stop was relocated. When Mrs. Teresa picked me up that morning, She saw a man standing in the woods behind where I was, just staring at me. She alerted the school secretary, who alerted the transportation office for the school district, and then the police. The police investigated and found some items wrapped up in a black t-shirt in the woods. A hunting knife, rope, a rag or washcloth, and tape. The police never found out who the shirt belonged to, but my bus driver, my parents and the police felt certain that whoever it belonged to had the worst of intentions, and probably for me. I think about this often, and wonder what would have happened to me had the bus driver been a few minutes late, or had she not noticed the man standing in the woods after I boarded the bus. Because of this instinct, my school district changed my bus stop to be located right in front of my house. That way, I could stay in my house until the bus pulled up. No more standing by the woods for me. I resumed riding the bus to school next year. And creepy bus stop man, let's not meet. And thanks, Mrs. Teresa, for most likely saving my life. This story is about my aunt. She was the loveliest woman that you could ever meet, and was a big influence in my life when I was growing up. I don't know how all of this started, but out of nowhere one day she just went crazy. Let me give you a bit of background. I am a 6'2", rather fit man. I practice Aikido and can bench press 240. My father and his brothers are pretty much as tall as I am. Maybe less strong due to age though, and most of them have been practicing fighting sports for a long time. My aunt, by contrast, is about 5'2", and probably weighs about 110 pounds at best. She would get incredibly angry and out of control at random times, spitting nonsense words, and there would be absolutely no way my father or I, or even together, would be able to get her down. It felt like Dragon Ball Z Yamcha trying to get Perfect Cell into a UFC submission. She had about 10 times my strength. We needed to be 4 to actually pin her down and get her to stop moving until she calmed down. This was extremely scary, as she would just switch without warning, which was so out of character for her. I didn't believe in the supernatural, but my grandmother, a traditional Moroccan woman, was convinced that she was possessed. And honestly, it really felt like it. For those of you who don't know, Morocco has a pretty big culture surrounding the supernatural, sorcery, possessions and exorcisms, so most of the elders in the family firmly believe in it. However, at the time, the rest of my family were not buying it. We took her to the hospital and had some extensive tests done on her, because we thought that she must be suffering from some kind of seizures. But everything came back negative. Someone even recommended a psychiatrist, and although we took her there, it was of no help whatsoever. We were all becoming very concerned. So fast forward a few months later, and it was becoming way too difficult for us to handle. My uncle contacted a good friend in Morocco, who was an exorcist in his family. He asked us to do one very strange thing. He asked my aunt if she could put a drop of blood into a glass of water, and leave the glass somewhere in the apartment while she slept, but just no way near her, so that she didn't get up and drink it while she was sleeping. We were reluctant, but my grandmother insisted on her doing it. On the morning, the glass was empty. I personally am still convinced she just woke up and drank it, but in the Exorcist version, she was possessed by a demon, commonly known in our culture as a jinn. Giving him blood was just a way for you to welcome him and calm him down temporarily, and she needed to see an exorcist ASAP. Now we were getting convinced that he was right, seeing her often becoming crazier and crazier. In desperate times, sometimes you just choose to believe in a possible solution. So at this point, I decided to believe in what he said, and we had to get proof that he was right. We lived in France, and we decided to drive down to Morocco, which was a 1,500 kilometer drive with a 6-hour boat ride, and then another 500 kilometers driving when we got to Morocco. During the drive, I have never been as scared as I am to this day. I was sitting in the back, my auntie in the middle and my dad on the other side. She went crazy at some point. We couldn't hold her down and she was trying to hit my uncle whilst he was driving. We nearly smashed into a wall, and my father had to dangerously choke her until she lost some strength. I know it sounds horrible, but she really was beyond it. So anyway, here we are in Morocco, getting to this village named Seferu, known as one of the biggest places in the country where sorcery happens. It's a rather creepy place, and not in a conventional creepy way either. What we all know of creeps are just what horror movies puts into picture, but the African creepy is on another level. We get to meet this exorcist guy, and he asks us to buy a sheep to sacrifice, and tells us that we should bring him the sheep's guts back for the exorcism to happen. My father and uncle take care of this, as I am absolutely petrified. As I stated earlier, I didn't believe in this. I decided to because honestly the situation called for it. But at this point, in a freaky, spooky village in the middle of Morocco, we were advised to never eat anything outside or accept anything from a stranger who might try and curse us, where everything looked twisted as hell. I was losing it, and really could not wait to leave this place forever. On the following day, we went to the exorcist's house and brought him these guts. He put them into a bowl and asked me if we were feeling strong enough to stay, as more people around would make it easier to exorcise. Well, I really wanted to leave, but seeing as everyone was staying, I stayed as well. My aunt was lying down in front of us next to the bowl, and we were sitting down around her holding hands, and the exorcist started saying stuff in a dialect that I couldn't understand. He gets sweaty and begins speaking faster, and I see my aunt twitching in what looks like pain. And then all of a sudden, all the lights went out. Holy shit, I think I peed my pants at this moment. The exorcist screamed something, and then my aunt screamed as well, and we were in total silence in the dark. I think the silence lasted for about 30 seconds, but honestly it felt like hours. The exorcist's assistant then came in with a lamp, and what we see is that both him and my aunt are passed out. The bowl is on the floor, and the guts are next to it. The guts had turned black. I'm not joking. They were red before the lights went out, and then they were black, as if they'd been singed beyond belief. I have goosebumps just remembering that and trying to picture it. The assistant urges us not to touch the guts at any cost. The exorcist wakes up and goes to put some water on his face, and then tells us to follow him. We went to a nearby empty hill, and when we reached the top, he asked us to burn the guts right then and there, as the demon was now possessing the sheep, and we could get rid of it. And that's exactly what we did. Since that day, my aunt has never shown any problems whatsoever. Her crisis period never happened again. Trying to remember this honestly scares the crap out of me. Just seeing her now gives me the chills, even though she is back to being the loveliest person I know. I am just so glad though, that she is back to the way she was. During my last semester at college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note, he was 325 pounds, whilst I was a mere 120. Whilst unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After a 2-year relationship, we got married, and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. I had a great job, and my wife didn't have to work outside the house. When my daughter was 2, my wife bore me a son, and my son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him as well as my daughter. One day, though, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, inverted almost. It was still in 3D, just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim on 4 legs and a white square shade. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it to the point that my wife got very concerned. That's when things started to happen. I didn't go to work. Something, I didn't know what, but something was not right with that lamp. I stopped eating. I only left the couch to use the bathroom at first. Soon, I stopped doing that too, as I wasn't eating nor drinking. I stared at that lamp for 3 days before my wife became extremely concerned. She had someone come over to try and talk to me. By this time, though, my cognizance was breaking up and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp was not real. My house was not real. My wife, my kids, none of it was real. The last 10 years of my life had not been real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up the entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and then I became aware of pain. A shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth." I opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I did not know. Lots of them were freaking out, and I was completely confused. At some point, a cop scooped me up and walked me across the sidewalk and into the grass and threw me face down into the back of a car. I was still disoriented. I was taken to the hospital by the cop, as it seemed he didn't want to wait for the ambulance driver. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving at the loss of my wife, my children, and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane, and I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams, that I would blink, and I would wake up again in the reality that I once knew. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. I have no idea what happened. Could I have dreamt it all? Could you dream 10 years of a whole life? A person, moments shared, places gone, new experiences, new tastes, new smells. Can it all come from your mind? Really? I don't think so. But like like I said, I have no explanation for what happened that day, and it still leaves me speechless. There was some construction being done at a new building at my university. So one day, my buddy and I meet some nice girls at the bar, and as the evening gets late, they ask to smoke a joint with us. For whatever reason, we decide the new construction site is a great location for this, and we go to it. 15 minutes in, and my buddy lets me know that there are cops watching us and that it's time to dip. We start to casually walk away, when the girls decide to book it immediately, drawing sirens. My friend taps me on the shoulder and reminds me that chivalry is dead. Those girls are on their own, and he has a spot to hide. He takes me to a half-constructed elevator shaft for the new building, and we climb all the way down to the bottom, where we find an underground, massive network of tunnels. When I say massive, I mean multiple channels each, which are multiple kilometers long. At this point we're pretty drunk, and we decide to see how far this thing goes. Every 500 meters or so, there would be a wooden barrier, but a few quick flying body checks made short work of them, and we continued on our way. Eventually we found a ladder and a hatch and decide that we'd come too far to not see what's up there. So we climb and go through and find ourselves in a locked room in the middle of our university library, about 1.5 kilometers and a bit from where we started. A janitor walks in and catches us clearly doing something we weren't supposed to be doing. But I pulled my best Seymour Skinner impression and said that we were just trying to find how to get out of there. Thankfully, he bought it, or was too confused to figure out how we got into the locked room in the first place, and decided to let us leave without any further questions. We didn't find anything too exciting in the tunnels, a few empty beer bottles, and that's about it. But I made it home without a possession and or trespassing charge, so I will call it a win. I attended a family reunion recently and saw a distant cousin of mine who was in his early to mid-20s, and he told me a story about an experience that he had during his 3rd year of high school. Let's call my cousin Francis. Francis was about 5'4" and thin for a 17-year-old at the time. He was also very prone to injuries, especially broken bones. Apparently, during his 3rd year of high school, the school he attended just hired more janitors, and according to my cousin, all of them were okay, except this particular one. The janitor was in his mid-50s, clean hair and teeth, but according to my cousin, there was something off about him. The guy would always carry a cross or some sage with him whenever he cleaned up classrooms, and would tell the student things like, "God bless you." He would always mumble biblical quotes underneath his breath. At first, a lot of the students didn't mind him. Francis said that many respected him, even though he did these things. One day, however, everything changed. My cousin and his 3 friends stayed behind after school one day to finish up a big project. The room was unlocked, but the teacher in charge left. But before she did, she told them to have that specific janitor lock the door for them when they were done. So my cousin and his friends continued their group project until at one point, the janitor came in. What my cousin remembered, he said, was that the janitor was in prayer pose and had his eyes closed. When he finished that, he watched them as they were working, and after about 10 to 15 minutes of staring at them, he offered to lead a religious sermon. My cousin said no, because they had a project to finish. Apparently, he didn't hear the no and decided to begin his sermon by saying that Francis and all of his friends were going to hell because they did not want to hear the word of God. The group was already frustrated because the project was worth 25% of their grade, so they politely told him to leave. The janitor, of course, became enraged and just lost it. He ran towards my cousin and punched him in the face, knocking him down onto the ground. Apparently, the janitor was strong as hell as well, and placed all of his weight on top of Francis. His friends were trying to pry the janitor off him because he had his hands around Francis's throat. As he's choking the life out of my cousin, he's yelling, "You devil, you will burn in hell for eternity." Francis was wheezing and basically borderline unconscious, causing panic for his friends. But I guess someone heard him, because another janitor came in, a female, and then got a broom and beat him with it until they managed to push him off my cousin. The janitor gets pushed off and gives Francis enough time to be pulled away by his friends and carried off into the hallway. The female janitor calls for backup, and long story short, the principal gets the police and the paramedics. The janitor was screaming religious stuff as he was being carried out by the officers. It turned out that the janitor dislocated my cousin's shoulder and seriously bruised his neck and ribs. Francis stayed in the hospital for a number of days. The whole experience gave him trauma, and he had to go to therapy for a few months. So in the end, the female janitor was awarded for saving my cousin, and also, the janitor was going to serve 15 years for this and past crimes. Francis still stayed at the school and eventually graduated, still living around the same area, but he promises to never return to that school.
Every year, my town hosts a carnival, carousels, fair games, Hall of Mirrors, and that stupid twirly swing ride that makes you want to vomit. They really pull out all the stops for this one weekend in October. Growing up, I would get sugar sick, as my mom liked to call it, from all the cotton candy and funnel cakes. I'd only feel the symptoms after the night was done, while laying in bed, clutching my prizes. I ignored the pain and played back all the festivities in my head. I skip the carnival now. It doesn't do anything for me anymore. So imagine my dismay as my girlfriend, who helps work the carnival, dragged me along one night after all the crowds had left. "No lines," she squealed. "I even know how to turn on the Ferris wheel." I tried to look excited. She yanked me over to the shooting gallery, and we sat down in front of a counter lined with water pistols. Several bullseye targets hung about 15 feet away. We fired away, but of course, I let her win. I jumped the counter and make my way over to the prize rack. Huge stuffed animals, baseball caps, and t-shirts lined the wall. "Which one do you want?" I yelled back. She tried to look like she was making a life-altering decision. I'll admit now, it was kind of cute. Before choosing, I see her whip out her cell phone and snap a picture of me next to the prizes. I'm stuck between picking you or the stuffed octopus next to the clown head doll. I'll take the octopus. I rolled my eyes and reached past the clown head doll for the octopus. From there, she pulled me over to the carousel. I watched her disappear into the engineer's control room, and a few seconds later the pipe organ started and the carousel cranked into motion. During the ride, she felt it was time for another picture. I really tried to smile this time. We only stayed in the Hall of Mirrors for a few minutes. It was pitch black in there. We kept bumping into the mirrors and each other. Of course, she snapped a picture in there too. The blinding flash didn't help our disorientation. After the terrifying Hall of Mirrors situation, we decided to leave. She told me she was going to go home and post pictures of the great night. The next morning I got on Facebook and noticed the small album she uploaded. I started reading through the comments. Lucky bastards, carnival all to yourself, nice. What caught me off guard were the next comments. Love the photobombing clown. Who is that dressed up as the clown? Wait, what? I looked through the pictures again, and sure enough, there it is. In the carousel picture, there was a tall clown in the background. The speed of the ride somewhat blurred his image, but I could see him just standing there, arms at his sides. In the Hall of Mirrors, the flash illuminated the face of a smiling clown in one mirror in the corner of the picture. There was something chillingly twisted about his expression. How many times did I collide into him thinking it was my girlfriend? And lastly, there was the picture of me standing next to the shooting gallery prize rack. There he was next to the octopus I grabbed for my girlfriend. I thought he was a doll. The realization made me absolutely sick. I was a hair's length away from him. His warm breath probably grazed my skin. What sort of sick delight did he get from doing this? I called up my girlfriend, who was still asleep, and asked her if she knew the clowns that were hired for the carnival. Her reply made me shudder. They got rid of clowns 5 years ago when parents complained that they were scaring the kids. I was camping with my best friend in the summer of 2006. We always went to the same area about 100 miles away from our hometown. Camping was our thing, our favorite thing to do. We always brought a bunch of food, drinks, and equipment. And one time, when we woke up in the morning and came out of our tent, all of our stuff was gone. So from then on, we would always set up a camera at night. We would skim through the usually boring footage the next day. Honestly, we never saw anything exciting and never caught anyone stealing from our sight. But this one time, we were watching the footage while eating breakfast and were horrified to see a guy walk into our campsite and sit in a chair that was facing our tent. We watched the clock on the footage, and he sat there for 20 minutes. Then, without warning, the footage showed the man get up, walk over to our tent, and unzip it. He then climbed inside. As you can imagine, we were freaking out. 5 minutes later, the man climbed back out and disappeared. I have no idea how we didn't wake up, and I have no idea what he did while he was in the tent with us. It literally makes me shiver every single time I think about it. Camping in Yellowstone National Park with my wife. It started pouring rain unexpectedly one night, and we were forced to ditch our tent and sleep in the SUV. It was thundering very loudly, and all of a sudden we hear a knock on the driver's side window. I wasn't looking at the window when it happened, and when I looked up at it, I saw no one. My first thought was that it was someone who needed something or needed help. Hesitantly, I rolled the window down. The rain was coming down hard, and it was so dark, I couldn't see anything. I yelled outside, "Hello?" But nobody responded, and a few seconds later, someone walked by my window towards the front of the car and circled around the front to the passenger side. My wife flipped out and locked the door. We could both see whoever it was stop by her door, and then they tried opening it. I rolled my window back up, and locked my side, and seconds later, the person vanished. It was horrifying. I was on summer break and went camping with my friend and his parents. We went to the lake during the day and did the s'mores thing at night. His parents shared a tent while my friend and I had our own. I can't remember where the campsite was, and I'm not really in contact with my friend anymore. But 15 years later, I'm assuming it wasn't the safest place to camp. Here's why. I woke up sometime in the early morning, like 3 or 4 a.m., and immediately saw a man's face looking in the tent at us. He had unzipped the door just enough to stick his head inside. He looked absolutely insane. He had big eyes and wild hair. I was so stiff from fear, I literally couldn't do anything. The man kept moving his head from left to right, very, very slowly, as if it was uncontrollable. I guess my friend could hear me breathing loudly or something, because he woke up too. He had the same reaction as me, and just laid there in terror, looking at this mysterious man. I'm not certain how long he was sitting there looking at us, but it felt like hours, shaking his head back and forth. At some point, we heard a noise close by, and so did the man. He disappeared quick, and a couple minutes later we got out of our tent and woke up his parents. The guy was long gone. I'm still afraid of camping to this day. This happened to my friend Jane earlier this summer. Jane lives in a bungalow a block away from Green Lake in Seattle. For those of you unfamiliar, Green Lake is a really popular place for running, outdoor and park activities, dining, etc., and is super busy during the summer. It's common for people to be out late at night during the summer, so Jane didn't think anything was amiss when she heard noises outside her house at midnight. She woke up again around 3 a.m., but this time the noises were louder, like something was hitting or tapping her house. She turned on all the lights and walked around her place, but didn't see anything and went back to bed. She felt uneasy and didn't sleep well the rest of the night, and woke up just before her alarm went off at 5 a.m. As she sat up in bed, she looked through her open bedroom door to see a man on all fours, army crawling down the hall towards her bedroom. Jane screamed, and as she goes to grab her phone to call 911, the man calmly stands, looks at her, and says,
Don't worry, I'm leaving.
The man turned around and walked toward the front door. She shut her bedroom door and called the police. After the police arrived, she discovered the man had removed all of her window screens and presumably entered her home around the time she woke up at 3 a.m. The police did not believe he intended to rob her, since he didn't take any of her valuables. The only things he did take were her car keys and her house keys that were in her purse by the front door. Jane's friend, a cop, believes the only reason this guy was so calm is because he has likely done this before. He also thinks that he had probably been watching her for some time and knew her schedule well enough to attack her when she was most defenseless. Whether he took her keys just to confuse her or because he intended to come back is beyond me. It was not uncommon back in the day for my mom to go to the store and leave me at home to watch TV. Nothing bad ever happened, but one time while watching TV, I heard the piano downstairs start to play. I just thought my mom was home, but was confused because she never played the piano. I went downstairs and walked into the room where the piano was. There was a crazy-looking man sitting at the piano and was looking at me with a huge, exaggerated smile as soon as I entered the room. I was frozen, and he continued to smile and play the piano. He stopped suddenly, but never looked away from me. It was pure terror and shock. I finally somehow was able to move and ran. I ran out my front door, which was unlocked, and ran to the neighbor's house across the street. The lady that lived there was very concerned, and I was surprised to see her walk over to my house by herself and go inside, and I was even more surprised when she came back out with the man. Apparently, the man was her mentally disabled brother, about 50 years old. I never saw him again, but I can remember his crazy, exaggerated smile, like it just happened yesterday. When I was 22, I was dating a guy that lived out in the country, pretty far away from where I lived. It was about 60 miles out, and while driving to his house one day, the sun started going down. It was about 8 p.m. It was still bright enough outside to see, but almost to the point where I needed my lights on. As I'm driving down this long stretch of road, I see something off in the distance. As I came a bit closer, I could see it was another car, a small red Toyota. It was stopped and turned kind of sideways in the opposite lane. When I came closer, I was horrified to see a woman lying face down in the middle of the road. I came to a stop about 30 feet away and grabbed my cell phone. I forgot that I didn't have any reception out here, and I sat thinking of what to do for a few minutes. Even though there was nothing that seemed threatening about the situation, I felt scared. I didn't want to leave my car, and I realized I had no way of providing any kind of help anyway, so I decided to drive past the body and keep going. And when I got to the store about 20 miles away, I would get some help. So I started to drive by the body very slowly, going about 2 miles per hour, and when I was sure I cleared the body, I hit the gas. Only about 5 seconds go by, and I look in the rearview mirror. The body is now standing up in the middle of the road, facing me. I'm laying in bed reading with my dog at night. My bedroom door is open, and my room is the only room in the house with the lights on. It's completely silent. I took a quick glance at my dog. My dog is staring out the door into pure darkness. I see him slowly tilting his head to the side, which he only does when he sees or hears something that seems bizarre. Then he slowly stands up and starts growling and snarling towards the dark hallway. I start to call his name, but he ignores me, and his growling is becoming more and more aggressive. I stand up next to him and look out the door, but I can't see anything, it's so dark. He then starts to bark. I look down at him, and he is definitely staring at something in the hallway. I lean down to pet him, and as soon as I touch his head, he stops. His mouth opens, and he starts panting while wagging his tail. It was so unnerving. I'm going to tell this story for my grandpa, since he is no longer with us. He told me a long time ago that he was living in Hawaii, and one weekend day he was at the beach with some of his friends and a group of girls. He said they were all swimming and having a great time, and that he and a pretty girl had hit it off and went for a walk down the beach. The stretch of beach was terribly long, according to my grandpa, and they walked all the way down the beach until nobody else was in sight, and they eventually had to stop walking on the sand when they hit some huge rocks. My grandpa says they swam out into the water and around the rocks and were amazed and excited to see a hidden area on the other side of them. They swam over to the sand behind the rocks and kept walking. The way my grandpa put it, they were walking and saw a person laying in the sand. Him and the girl both knew right away, somehow, that the person was dead. The girl became scared and wanted to turn back, but my grandpa kept going, and she followed. He says that when they got to the person, they were horrified to see it was a woman covered in blood who had looked to have been stabbed many times. He says at that time the woman vomited, and here's the weirdest part of the story. I'm not sure why he told me this, but he said he briefly thought that this would be a damn good place to stab someone to death, and that it was a good thing he didn't have any knives on hand. He laughed after telling me that, and then said they just walked away and told their friends. He never told the police department, and isn't sure that any of them did. Alright, so it was summer, and my two best friends and I just finished our shopping for the camping trip. We were all 16, and my friend's dad was taking us. It was quite a long drive, and we arrived about 4 hours after we had left. We set up a couple of tents, and it was already getting dark by the time we finished. We made a fire in the pit and ate dinner. We stayed up late that night talking, and my friend's dad even let the three of us drink beer. We finally went to sleep after talking and screwing around for hours. The next morning we woke up early, and breakfast was already being made. My friend's dad had told us about a waterfall he had seen a long time ago that he was sure was nearby. He said he went swimming in the water below the waterfall, and that it was secluded and really cool. He said we would have to go on a hike to get there, and I was looking forward to seeing that waterfall more than the others, and I really wanted to go swimming. After breakfast we changed into some hiking clothes, grabbed our swim trunks, and walked off into the direction of the supposed waterfall. 3 minutes into the hike, we were walking through the woods and saw a very small shack, or something like that somebody had built. It looked very old. It was run down and falling apart. We of course became curious and started walking over towards it. That's when we saw him, a clown standing in the open doorway of the shack. The three of us stopped dead in our tracks and didn't know what to do or what to say. I can't really speak for them, but at first I wanted to laugh. But then terror quickly swept over me because of the realization that this was completely messed up. Why the hell would there be a clown out here? The clown stood there like a statue, and it was obvious that he was trying to scare us. Then he started running in our direction, and we of course turned around and ran. All three of us fell and tripped over each other because of the adrenaline and how scared we were. We made it back to camp and stared in the direction we had just come from, but he never emerged from the trees. My friend's dad said he believed us when we told him, but I don't think he really did. He was way too calm about it. The three of us freaked out and laughed about it after a while, but I think about it whenever I hang out with the two of them, and we always bring it up. This was 9 years ago, and I still think about it whenever I think of them or see a clown. What the hell was he doing out there? Planning to kidnap or murder someone? Was he just sitting out there, waiting for people to see him? The most horrific night of my life. Halloween 2010. My cousin Chris and I were roommates at the time, and we had just moved in together 2 months before Halloween. We were pretty well known in our town and wanted to throw a Halloween party at our new place. We spent the day getting the party ready, buying drinks and food, and setting up spider webs and other decorations. It was a pretty good time. I dressed up as a mad doctor, and Chris dressed up as a clown. He was the life of the party and was doing ridiculous clown-like things to make everyone laugh. I was 18 and wasn't really used to drinking very much, but at that party, that night, I drank a lot. I started with beer, but then started taking shots with people. I can't really remember when people started to leave, but I think it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. I remember being so drunk that I couldn't move from the chair I was sitting in the living room. I was so drunk. People started leaving and I didn't even notice or care. I was just watching TV. I kind of remember Chris telling me he was going out to buy some alcohol for some people, and then I passed out. The next thing I remember is waking up to Chris coming back, walking through the garage door, and sitting on the couch opposite of me. The whole room was spinning fast, and I could not keep my vision still enough to focus on anything. I remember asking Chris if he bought the booze, and he just shook his head no. After that, I just remember going in and out of consciousness. My phone was ringing, but I ignored it. I was too drunk and tired to reach into my pocket and answer it. But it kept ringing, over and over and over. I finally pulled it out and hit the green button on the screen. "Yeah," I said into the phone drunkenly. Then I heard Chris's voice say, "Shit, dude, finally. We were just about to leave. We're at Jack in the Box. Do you want anything?" In my drunken state, I didn't put it together right away, but I remember looking over at Chris on the couch, but the room was spinning so much I couldn't make out his face, just the bright colors from his costume. I then said to Chris sitting on the couch, "Dude, stop. I think I'm gonna throw up. Stop calling me. Just stop." He said nothing back, and then I heard Chris's voice on the phone say, "Later," and he hung up. I sat there for a minute, barely able to think, but then somehow I had a moment of clarity. I realized that I heard girls in the background on the phone, and then I put it together. I sat up on the chair and then stood up on my feet. Whoever was sitting on the couch in front of me was a complete blur, so I started walking over to him. Each step was extremely difficult. I stopped in front of him, squinted my eyes, and put my hands on the side of my head. It worked. It steadied my vision, and I could clearly see the older man sitting on the couch, smiling at me. I asked him who the hell he was, and then he got up and walked past me. I stood there facing the couch, unable to turn around. That's the last thing I remember. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital, and I felt a very different kind of drunk. I asked a random nurse standing near me where I was and what the hell was going on, and she told me that I had been attacked. About 24 hours later, I was finally thinking clearly again when I woke up. Chris, my sisters, my parents were all in the room. I asked what happened again, and Chris said that he found me laying on the living room floor in a puddle of blood. They were as confused as I was, but I tried to tell them that I thought that it was Chris in the room with me. They didn't understand, but I told them there was a man. There was a man in the house. It was a clown. 6 years ago, I had a group of friends that always hung out together. My girlfriend at the time was also a part of this group. One day I get a phone call from the cops, and they tell me my girlfriend is at the police station because she found a body at our friend Jessica's house. She went over to Jessica's house to pick her up and found her in a pool of blood in her bedroom. She was stabbed repeatedly by her boyfriend, who was also a part of our group. It was shocking, but over time, she got over seeing what she did, and we moved on. That is, until one day I picked up her phone while she was in her backyard gardening and started looking through her photos. I stumbled onto an unbelievably gruesome picture. She had taken a close-up picture of Jessica before the cops picked her up. Her face was mangled completely. I left her house immediately and took the phone to the cops. It was a crazy situation. I was told later that she also stole some of Jessica's jewelry. From that day on, I've had this disturbing feeling that she might have had something to do with Jessica's murder. I was on my way home from work years ago, riding the subway as I always did. The subway was always packed, but I had managed to find a seat this day. As I was sitting there, people watching, I felt something stuffed in between the seat and the window. I looked down, and it was an envelope. I pulled it out, and it was sealed. There was nothing written on it, and I, of course, opened it. There was a small slip of paper, folded in half. I pulled it out and read the single sentence printed on it. I've killed 16 people. Back in the 60s and the 70s, my family lived in Chatsworth, California. The town was at the foot of the Santa Susana Mountains, which seemed to be a wonderful wilderness playground to all of the kids in the area. Browns Canyon Road wound up the mountains, with maybe only 2 houses along its 6 or 7 miles. It really was a beautiful area with a stream, wildflowers, and live oaks, and the local teens liked to party up there at night. One night, a bunch of teens were sitting by the stream, the starlight, the rippling noise of the water, and the warm summer night. All were made even more intense by the fact that they were stoned on LSD. One of the boys leaned back on his hands where he was sitting in the dirt. Lost in thought, he started running his hand over something behind him. It was bumpy in a regular sort of way, so his fingers made kind of a rhythm. Bump, 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 bump. After a while, he finally turned to see what it was. He had his hand in the mouth of a decapitated girl. He had been running his hands over her teeth over and over again. That was the bump, bump, bump. The poor girl had been chopped up and dumped along the stream with some dirt thrown over her, and the kids were sitting on her. Of course, they all freaked out, but I heard that the kid who found her never came down from his acid trip. I can't verify that part, but I do know we didn't see him around that area again. The entire neighborhood was spooked for quite some time. In 5th grade, coming back inside from recess, I found a note in my desk. It read, "I am going to kill you." I showed it to my teacher, and she tried getting the person who wrote it to come forward by scolding the entire class, but nobody ever admitted to doing it. The next day, coming back from recess, I found a note that said the same thing in the same handwriting. The teacher tried to compare the writing with everyone in the class, and she contacted my parents and the principal, but nothing became of it. 3 years later, in 8th grade, at a different school, I was finishing up my 3rd period gym class. I went into the locker room to change back into my school clothes. When I opened my locker, a note fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it. My blood turned ice cold as I read the same words in the same handwriting. Please welcome my friend, Mortis Media. Are you ready for the darkness to take control?
This started when my 2 brothers, David and Luke's girlfriend Sarah, all drove down to the desert to spend some time in the country. This is reservation land, as it were, so red dirt everywhere. We had some pistols and decided to go target practice. We took our gear and some old targets to this place called Devil's Heartbeat. I had never been before, but the 3 of them were familiar with the area. It was a canyon about 200 feet deep, and we stayed on one end of the canyon by the drop-offs, and to our left was a ravine. And about 50 feet over, the opposite side of the canyon rose up above us. On the opposite end, there were some Anasazi ruins. The Navajo may disagree with historians on the Anasazi's origins and departure, as according to the Navajo, they simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind plates, dishes, and food, and went into another dimension, or some equivalent. But whatever the history, the Navajo do not like to wander into Anasazi ruins. I never asked why, but figured it had something to do with disrespect or preserving history. As such, none of the others cared a bit about these canyon ruins. They were more interested in shooting pistols. I could see old beds, ladders, and even cave drawings on the cliffs with my naked eye. And I got this strange fixation going over me. I'm not Navajo, and felt that their rules didn't apply to me. I set off down the cliffs with a rope, and decided I would climb down, cross the canyon floor, and then climb back up. This was a bad idea for a million reasons, but it was like an obsession. I can't explain the feeling. It was like magnetism. I wanted to be in those ruins, and it wasn't just some touristy curiosity. I felt as if I were meant to go there. I kept slipping and getting stuck on the rocks. I was so frustrated I started crying. Finally, I was deterred by the unmistakable sound of a growl coming from the canyon floor below me. There were trees down there, so I couldn't see what was making the growl, but mountain lion immediately rose to mind, and I got my ass back up the cliffside. I said nothing to the others, and we shot the guns for a while. The only other strange occurrence was that while Sarah was aiming, things got eerily quiet. We all heard sounds from around us, behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was like a growl, then a hoarse laugh, almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area, and there was nothing, certainly not on the cliff tops where we heard it anyway. The creepiest part was that while David, Sarah, and I all heard it from a close distance, Luke heard the exact same noise right by his ear. We ended up camping out to see if anything would happen, and this is when things got completely terrifying. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. We had guns though, and were sleeping with no bags nor tents. Just some blankets under the stars with a little fire. So I felt safe when we had all laid down, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up a few hours later to see everyone else laying down with their eyes wide open, listening. The canyon was completely full of noises. The only way to describe it is people banging rocks together. There would be one set, maybe 300 yards away, then another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 feet away. The canyon echoes, so it was hard to tell exactly how many rock smacking noises there were, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened for perhaps 10 minutes. No other animal noises. No nothing. Finally, David, who is a hard-ass and the least superstitious of his family, shouted, "Shut up!" And everything immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at each other wide-eyed. It was dead quiet. And then we heard another super weird set of noises from the Anasazi ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it almost sounded like a zebra, and then the rock/stick/whatever started up again. But this was worse, because now other animal noises came in. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching, owls hooting, and those terrible zebra noises. We said nope. We got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse the fire, pack our blankets and speed away, with the noises continuing the entire time. That night, I was obviously pretty shaken. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat by me, and said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit to avoid a lecture about messing around with the spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal. I felt like I wanted to go there. Why couldn't I go? It would have been beautiful. After I word vomited all over her, I could see that she had a really concerned look over her face. "What is it?" I asked, totally confused, and she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to lure people. When they get up to the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. The town has a public accessible kiva, kind of like a tourist trap for little podunk places. But since I didn't see the ruins up close, I went down via the kiva, and I went alone, as of course my superstitious family refused to enter other natives' dwellings. I figured that nothing could push me off a cliff if I were in a kiva. I was right, but something even worse happened. Fast forward a few weeks later, I worked at a shitty call center in Salt Lake City, third shift. It was my first night alone, and I was feeling jumpier than ever since the kiva. My brothers already warned me that I had a skinwalker following me, but I of course did not believe it. I don't smoke, but I follow my co-workers out for smoke breaks because I liked the chat. Tonight I lurked in the doorway because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out of the glass door, and being a total weirdo, it hit me then how paranoid I had been. That's what skinwalkers do. They mess around with your mind. Whilst I was pacing in front of the glass door, I decided that this whole thing was stupid, and I was going to go outside and stand there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filing back in, but I walked out, put my hands in my pockets and looked at the sky. I looked at the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something I will never be able to have a rational explanation for. We have 6 parking lots. In one of the lots far away from me, perhaps 100 feet away, I could see something walking. It was like a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping and walked like it were tired or hurt. Animal lover me forgot about skinwalkers, and I started walking towards it, making the ch-ch-ch, come here doggy, noises, and then I stopped abruptly. The dog had the body form of a greyhound, and it was grey, but there was something really wrong with it. It had bloody legs and limped, but it walked more like a person would on their feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and fro, and didn't make any sense. When it heard me, it just stopped without turning, something I've never known any dog to do, and finally, it looked over its shoulder at me. And this is the freakiest part. The dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were barred as if it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was like a whistle growl, noises no regular animals make. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk to me, or that it was taunting me. Somehow in the middle of all of this, I realized it didn't have a tail, and I'd heard from all the Navajo stories that skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Screw all logic and rationality. I turned and jetted. I didn't look back until I was inside the building and had pulled the door shut behind me. And when I looked back, of course, it was gone. When I described this to my brothers, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker. I then went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, them, and their apartments. I never saw the creepy bloody dog again, and have ever since never slightly wanted to visit those cliff ruins. I began babysitting at 13 to earn extra money to spend on horribly embarrassing things, like Fall Out Boy CDs. I would almost always work for my father's clients, he's a lawyer, and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for one family who had a little girl of 9 and a little boy of 7. The parents seemed okay, a tad crotchety, giving me a full schedule to follow and jokingly threatening to beat any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to accuse me of even knowing a boy, given that I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzy hair at my age. Almost immediately after the parents leave, the little girl sings in a creepy high-pitched voice, "We're all alone now." Righto, cue the Shining soundtrack. I know, the little boy chimed in. Let's play rape. Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard that term on TV and knew the word was shocking and said it just for a reaction. I totally bought into it at the time, sputtering wide-eyed and changing the subject quickly. These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on the TV because their parents did not seem to allow their precious 9 and 7-year-olds to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just go play PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out here." I knew exactly what was headed. I said to them that they could go watch any other TV show in the living room whilst I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Before I'd even got the bread out, I hear a massive crash. It seems like the little girl had broken a glass. Tutting and pissed, but ultimately with no way of punishing her, I cleaned it up, whilst the two incredibly weird kids watched with wide eyes. So I dumped the broken glass into the trash and went back to making the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so whilst the children had chicken, I made a simple salad sandwich for myself. Just as I was finishing, the little boy screamed out in what sounded like a pantomime of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. "My ankle," he howled, dramatically flopping back into the couch. While I tried to figure out how he had hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. Peripherally, I was aware of this, but didn't really pay it any mind and focused on the little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying, "I went to stand, but it hurt too much. I don't know," over and over, until his eyes suddenly flicked to just behind me, where I could see the little girl standing with a perturbing smile on her face. It was a miracle he was healed. At this point, I was just thinking these kids were very strange and craved attention a little too much and probably needed more parental involvement. But whatever, I was 13 and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two to eat at the dining table, and I went to get us soda and returned. After pouring soda for both of them, I realized that they hadn't taken a bite out of their sandwiches yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. They smiled. "For you to take a bite out of yours." I am so glad I had a gut feeling to open my sandwich, because when I did, I saw glass. Broken glass. The broken glass that I had put in the trash. I stared in horror at these two little children, staring at me, giving me maniacal grins. I lost it, shouting, "Are you two serious? At the very least, you could have really injured my mouth. What's wrong with you?" Instead of crying or apologizing, or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little kids began laughing. And not a childish laugh either. It was a low and threatening laugh. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was that these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my older sister, who was 17 at the time, told her over the phone what happened and cried about it a little. She came and took over for me. We left the house with chills after the parents arrived. I never babysat for those two again. What I can't get past is the level of predetermination that went into sprinkling that broken glass into my sandwich, and the total remorseless way that they responded to me being upset. They were unlike any two kids I've ever met before or since. I was a new nurse at our hospital and had only been working there for a couple of months. I had brought a patient of mine up from day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they called me back down and asked me to bring up her family, as she didn't speak enough English to communicate and we needed her consent for a procedure. After dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room and headed back down the hall to the elevators. I took the way back to get to the ER, and all the hallways were deserted. You see, this used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but it has been shut down for years, and all the rooms are deserted, full of broken equipment, beds, and just general crap. As I reached the nurses' station at the T-junction, between the pediatric hallway and the hallway that goes down to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station further down the hall. She had big pigtails and was wearing a brown dress and white shoes, holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the day surgery waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of these rooms and might get hurt or lost. So I said, "Hey little girl, what are you doing? You don't need to be over here. You're going to get hurt." And I walked around the nurse's station so that I could grab her hand and bring her back. I shit you not. As I got about 15 feet away from her, she vanished. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity, until the elevator got to the floor I was on. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, and one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "Geez, what's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, the nurse said, "Oh, you saw the little ghost girl? Yeah, she's been around here for years." And I remember replying, "Well, thanks for telling me about this before." Apparently the ghost has been here ever since the ER, ducking in and out of patients' rooms and peeking around curtains. My wife worked up on the 7th floor and said that one time on nights, a whole row of patients started yelling about a little girl that was running around in the rooms. I guess she gets around. I was working at an 100-year-old abandoned farmhouse several years ago. My co-worker and I were told to find the well for the house, since they were thinking about developing the property. After looking for a while, we figured it might be in the old house. I grabbed my flashlight and we headed in through a window that wasn't boarded up very well. The place was creepy. The second floor had a burnt goat carcass and pentagrams drawn in ash all over the walls. So that started the chills and goosebumps. We eventually made our way to the basement, where I almost fell into the very deep well at the end of the steps. I'm not sure how deep it was, but our 25-inch tape wouldn't hit the bottom. Anyway, my curiosity was still running wild, so we went searching around the basement. My co-worker noticed that one of the stone walls didn't make it all the way up to the ceiling, and it was probably a fake wall. Good call on his part. He boosted me over the wall, and I helped him climb over. The first room was empty and had nothing exciting, just dark, wet, and cold. Looking around, there was another wall with an opening. I decided to go first, and I was boosted over the wall. My co-worker thought it would be funny to hang on to the flashlight for a while, whilst I stumbled in the dark. Finally, he tossed it over to me, and that's when I began freaking out. The room had chains built into the walls, with wrists and ankle shackles. The walls had scratch marks from nails, and I'm guessing that someone tried to escape. I lasted about 30 seconds in that room before I started to dash over both walls and the well, right out of the window we climbed through to get into that creepy house. I don't think it was just the shackles or the scratch marks that creeped me out, but the ice-cold chills that shot down my spine, like there was something truly evil lurking in that place. This is a story that I'm not supposed to be telling. A family secret that I'm not supposed to know about. When my grandfather was younger, he became the principal of an elementary school. He was in his late 20s, early 30s at the time. And despite being young, he was a born leader. He was a great principal, and everyone loved him. I can attest to that, as I attended multiple award ceremonies for him, and the respect and admiration he received was crazy. There was a young boy at the school who was having behavioral issues in class, and my grandfather saw the kid didn't have a lot of parental support. So he called the father and had a talk with him about spending more time with his son and just a general parenting session. It turned out that all the boy needed was his dad's attention, and after a few weeks, he was happy and was a model student. Whenever my grandfather would leave school late, he would see the dad was playing basketball with his son after he got home from work. It was one of those moments that he took pride in, being able to make a difference in people's lives. However, not everything had such an easy solution, and my grandfather found himself having to deal with an employee, Stanley the janitor, who was showing up for work drunk. Stanley was an alcoholic with a mean streak, and my grandfather tried on multiple occasions to deal with his behavior. Finally though, Stanley one day showed up so drunk that my grandfather sent him home and called the superintendent to let him know that he was going to fire him the next morning after he sobered up. He then warned them to let him deal with Stanley when he was sober, because he was not a stable person. As it goes in these kind of stories, the superintendent was furious and decided that he was going to call Stanley himself and fire him, despite my grandfather's warning. No one called my grandfather to tell him about it either, so he was completely in the dark and thought that he would just deal with it in the morning. Stanley was furious and went to the school that evening. He searched the offices, my grandfather's included, and tore things apart until finally he had what he wanted. He was in a blaze of fury, and on his way out, he saw the father and son playing basketball. He walked towards them and pulled something out of his trousers. It was a gun. He then proceeded to shoot the little boy, killing him instantly. The father was so upset and was crying hysterically. But somehow, he managed to get the gun away from Stanley and shot him. My grandfather was called to the elementary school immediately by police because there were 2 dead bodies, the little boy's and Stanley's. But what was even worse was the crying from the father and him saying that he couldn't save his son. It was clear that he would never forgive himself for that day. My grandfather was pulled aside by one of the police who had searched Stanley for evidence. They had found a list, a hit list of people that he was going to kill and all the addresses of the people that he had received when he was searching the offices. My grandfather was number 1 on that list. So if it wasn't for that father, it's likely that I would have never been able to meet my grandfather, and possibly my mother and grandmother would have been killed if Stanley had been able to complete his mission. To this day, I get goosebumps whenever I hear that story, and it's just so chilling. My grandfather never uttered a single word about this after his initial recount to my mother, and she made me swear to never tell him that I knew. He carried the weight of that boy's death until the day he died. So Stanley, I'm glad we never had to meet, and that you were stopped before you could cause more harm.
I used to work as a cashier at a BP that was right off the interstate. It doubled as a truck stop and was open 24 hours. I had worked there for about a year, so I was fairly comfortable with the job, and I was used to working night shifts alone, despite being a smaller person. So I was working one night, and everything was going as usual. It was about 1 a.m., and I saw a pickup truck pull in. 3 passengers got out and entered the store. The 2 men were wearing camouflage outfits, and the woman was wearing jeans and a sweater. The men talked to the woman outside of the door before entering, and then they all went straight to me at the counter and asked for some cigarettes. As the one man was paying, the other one went to the other side of the store, looking at drinks. I looked at the woman and realized that she had a look of panic on her face. I immediately felt in my gut that something bad was going on. We made eye contact, and she mouthed the words, "Help me." Then, the man grabbed his cigarettes with one hand and the woman's arm with the other, and yelled at his buddy that they were ready to go. I was only 19 and wasn't really sure what to do, so I waited until they walked out the door and slid my hand under the counter and hit the panic button. About 5 to 10 minutes later, the cops got there, and I told them what happened. They looked at the surveillance videos and told me that they were investigating a kidnapping with a description of that same vehicle. I told them which direction they went on the interstate, and the rest of the officers left after them while I gave my statement to the one who stayed behind. I never did find out if they caught them or not. In college, I would go home every other weekend to work at the job I had since high school. I would drive directly from campus after my last class on Friday to my job. After my shift was done, I'd go back to my parents' house, which was out in the middle of nowhere. My parents weren't yet home when I got back from work. They often spent their Friday and Saturday evenings drinking like they were the ones in college. So the house was dark, and since it was mid-fall, so was the yard, except for that one yard light. I pulled into my normal parking spot, got out of the car, and then turned to open the back door of my car and get my backpack out of the back seat. That's when I noticed that the bathroom light was on. Was that light on when I pulled up? It must have been, right? As I was contemplating the light and reaching for my backpack, there was suddenly a very angry looking old woman standing in the window staring at me. She was very pissed off at me, and I knew it. We stood there staring at each other for a good 10 seconds when my parents pulled into the driveway and distracted me from my stare down. By the time I turned back, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side. The real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. After it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull over and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass behind some bushes to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then I fell asleep. Some time later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock. 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time, it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting my car. But why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door open. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like,
Hey you! Get out of the car now!
I sped off. I never saw the guy again. I once had to work at a very late shift at the funeral home to prepare a body for a viewing the following morning. I think I finally finished my work around midnight. It was winter, and I ended up getting snowed in at the funeral home that night. I had to stay the night until the plows came early in the morning to plow me out. Let me tell you, it is creepy as hell sleeping in a funeral home, knowing that there are 20 dead people in the basement, especially when you hear constant noises. I'm in college, and I live on a campus in a dorm room. This dorm is very old and community style. I've been living here for 2 months with my roommate, and everything has been fine. In the last week, we've had all of our lights in our room, just our room, go out. We've been trying to put maintenance requests in for the past week, but the website won't allow us to do it for some reason. Last night, I heard my roommate yelling from the hallway that her key wasn't working in the lock and that she needed in now. So I stumbled out of bed and was reaching for the lock on the door when I looked over and saw her asleep in her bed. I backed away from the door to go back to sleep, thinking that it had been a dream. I took a last look at my sleeping roommate and went to turn around to climb into my bed when I saw the shadow under the door. The door is a good inch or two off the ground, so I bent down to see if there was someone standing at our door, or the one across the hall. When I was eye level with the crack, I saw a pair of boots facing the door. Then, the person turned away, and I heard the stairwell door open. I couldn't even turn on the lights, because the bulbs were out, so I crawled into bed with my lamp, and sat there for an hour, because I was freaking out. To get onto the girls' floor, you have to have the student card of someone that lives here. They lock the building up at midnight every night to make sure that only students and guests are inside. We've had problems with homeless people sleeping in the basements of some of our buildings. I was freaking out because the boots at the door were men's boots. I could have swore I heard my roommate's voice. I took care of my mentally handicapped cousin a few years back. She could get around well enough, but due to severe arthritis in her knees and ankles, she had to be watched, helped into the bath, shit like that. I would go into her room in the morning, help her to her walker so she could go to the bathroom, and I would make her breakfast. One morning, I heard the water running in the bathroom when I went in to check on her. I had to pass her room on the way to the bathroom. When I did, I saw that she was in her rocking chair in the corner, her blanket over her head, and she was rocking back and forth. "Don't leave the water on. You're going to flood the place." I went into the bathroom to shut the faucet off, and my cousin was there, washing her face. I immediately ran back to the room, but it was just her blanket crumpled up on the rocking chair. My cousin wanted to know why I undid her bed. I didn't stay too long after that. When I was younger, I used to live by the woods and could see a cemetery from my back porch. One Easter, I remember waking up and seeing the Easter bunny. I didn't tell anyone, but there was an extra Easter egg in my house that my parents didn't hide. Years later, when I was in high school, I asked my parents if they ever dressed up like the Easter bunny and came into our room. They said they would never go through so much trouble. Then, my younger sister, who I shared a bunk bed with when this happened, said she remembers when the Easter bunny came into our room. I was terrified that we both remembered seeing a person dressed as a bunny in our room. To make it even weirder, I told the friends I sat with at lunch what happened. One of the girls was my neighbor across the street. She told me one Easter a long time ago, she looked out her window during the night and saw the Easter bunny standing in her driveway. It gave me chills. To this day, I am terrified of people who wear that costume. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always ended up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. One night, I wake up to a strange feeling, like an instinct. I just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in the tree in front of my house. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. My dad grabs something defensive. I tremble in my mom's arms until my dad comes back in and says that he saw no one and he wants me to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I tell my sister what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. Everything is silent and calm, and I finally think to myself, I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. He gives me a hush signal and runs away. He just turns around to run a straight line away. Every bit of this story is true. I grew up playing pool, and going out of town for the weekend to play a tournament was common. My friends and I were in our early 20s and on a tight budget, so we decided to carpool and share a hotel room for the next tournament. We even found a fourth guy, Bert, to ride along with us. I had only met Bert once prior. He was a huge redneck with a wandering eye. Intimidating and drunk might be the best words to describe him. On the 3-hour ride to the tournament, Bert was already drunk and talking crazy shit about his wife. Apparently, They were going through a divorce, and he was not happy about it. He eventually starts describing this fight where he has her on the floor with his foot on her neck and then cutting her throat. Everyone in the vehicle was like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? We all make it back home from the tournament, and the following Monday, I get a call. It's the cops. Holy shit. They asked me the strangest questions about Bert. Did he have mud on his shoes? Did he mention his wife? What was his demeanor like on the trip? Weeks later, I would find out what really happened. Bert murdered his wife that Thursday night. The next afternoon, he gets in my car for a road trip. That fight that he described in the car wasn't just some fight. He was describing how he murdered her. I went on a road trip and shared a hotel room with this guy. I had a very frightening night last year. Out of the blue, I live by myself, and late in the night, I got a phone call. My cell phone's volume was down very low, and I couldn't hear it ring while I slept. I woke up for no particular reason about an hour after the call. I grabbed my phone and looked at the screen, and it was a private number. I went back to sleep and thought nothing of it. I woke up again a couple hours later, and I looked on my phone to see that the same number had called 15 more times. That was enough to wake me up completely, and I saw that I had 3 new voicemails from that number. I listened to the first one that was left. A man whispered into the phone,
I just crawled through the window in your dining room.
That obviously made my hair stand on end, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I sat in bed, terrified, for a few minutes, thinking of what I should do next. I listened to the second voicemail. The man then said into the phone,
Your bedroom door is locked.
After hearing that, I immediately called 911. I told them somebody was in my house. They proceeded with questions, and I didn't hear a single one. I was so scared. I stayed on the phone with them until 2 officers showed up at my house, and they searched the place. Eventually, I felt comfortable enough to let them leave, and when they did, I listened to the third voicemail. The man whispered into the phone,
I am hiding in your house.
After hearing that, I got in my car and drove to my sister's house and slept there that night. I didn't return home until the next day with more police officers, my sister, and her husband. The whole place was searched inside and out, and we all found nothing. Not a single sign of forced entry, nothing. Not a single phone call after that night. And I need to tell myself it was just some kid trying to scare me. When I was in high school, you could say I had some mental issues. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I was depressed all the time and thought about killing myself regularly. My parents had me go off to a psychiatric institution for boys. I made friends with boys who were like me. They had similar problems and understood where I was coming from. This one day, a new boy arrived on our block. We all knew very quickly that he was a very special case. On his first day, he attacked another boy with a plastic spoon he had broken. He was put into private isolation where he received counseling every day, as well as massages to try to keep him calm. At some point, he was free to be around the rest of the boys again, and on the day he was first allowed to join us, he came up behind me when I was drawing and bit the back of my neck. I don't mean he gave me a nibble either. I was rushed to the nurse's station and had to get 23 stitches. I was released from the institution before this boy was, and every day I was there with him, I was terrified. He would look at me often with a hatred in his eyes. All he wanted to do was hurt me and every other boy there. I have no idea what became of him. My father remarried when I was 7 years old. My new stepmother had 3 kids. The youngest, a boy, was just a baby. Her oldest was also a boy, and he was a very nice kid. He was 2 years older than me. Her middle child was my age, and she was a girl. This girl, we'll call her Amy, was extremely troubled. She was a very, very mean child. When we first moved in with them, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and Amy would sometimes be there in the doorway to my room, watching me. I'm not exaggerating. She actually did this, and my dad flipped out when I told him. Amy stopped doing it after she got in trouble, but after a few weeks, one night, I woke up to unbelievable pain. Amy had pushed a thumbtack into my forehead. I screamed and cried, and my dad and Amy's mom came running into the room. Amy got in trouble, of course, but not like she should have. My parents were in denial and figured she was just mad at me, but I told them there was something wrong with her and that nothing had happened, and she had no reason to be mad at me and to do something like this. I could tell that my dad knew there was something more that was wrong. I tried telling my dad I thought she should go to a hospital, but at my age, I didn't really know what they were called, just a hospital for people with problems. We lived down a dirt road, and during the weekends, sometimes I was forced to play with Amy. I constantly told her to stop staring at me and to not come near me. I was living in hell. This little girl was crazy. All she talked about was becoming a doctor so she could do surgery, but maybe not good surgery, as she put it. She said it would be fun to cut people's bodies open and fill their cavities and arteries with broken glass and nails. To say I was scared of her would be an understatement. One day, I was playing in my room when she told me to come with her. She wanted to show me something. I followed her down to the creek by our house, and when I got there, I almost fainted. She had brutally killed a bunch of ducks. I ran home and cried. She told me that if I told anybody, she would stick thumbtacks into my head again. My dad and her mom eventually got divorced a couple years later, and it's been many years now. About 5 years ago, I saw on her mom's social media account that she was committed to a mental institution. Surprise, surprise. I was asked to house sit a few years back for my good friend Paul. He and his family were going to Disney World on vacation for 5 days, and he wanted me to stay there and feed their pets, and just make sure everything was cool while they were gone. I was unemployed, and he offered me $200. I really needed the money, so I agreed to do it. The first couple of days were fine, fun, and relaxing as a matter of fact. They had a hot tub that I took advantage of, and their 2 dogs were really awesome. On my 3rd night there, however, things started to get weird. I made a sandwich for dinner and left everything on the counter, or so I thought. About an hour later, I returned to the kitchen counter to grab a beer and put everything away, and I noticed the bread was already put up, and the mustard and mayonnaise were also already back in the fridge. I wasn't positive that I didn't put everything away, but I was pretty sure. I brushed it off and fell asleep watching TV. The next day I woke up and the TV was off. Not just the TV though, all the lights in the room, the TV, and the speakers too. I was officially weirded out by this point and thought they might have had a ghost or something. Again I brushed it off. The rest of the day, everything was cool. Nothing weird happened. Then, the next day, I went to the store, and when I came back, I decided to get back in the hot tub. A while later, I got out and realized my towel that I had left hanging on the hook on the deck was gone. I went inside, dripping all over the place, and found my towel in the master bathroom, flung over the side of the shower. I knew for sure I had not put the towel there, and I called Paul to ask him if he was used to weird shit like this happening in his house, and if they might have had a ghost. He told me no, that they hadn't experienced anything weird. He then told me to ask John. I asked who John was, and his answer confused me. He said it was his brother-in-law. I told him his brother-in-law has not come by since I'd been there. His response gave me goosebumps. He said John lives there with us. I was so freaked out that I tuned out everything else he said to me and finally said back to him, "I have not seen him one time. Why would you ask me to house sit if he was here too?" He then said John was disabled and he couldn't drive a car or get around the house easily. After hearing that, I told him again I haven't seen him once and that I was so freaked out I was gonna leave. He tried to keep talking to me, but I hung up and ran to start gathering my clothes and whatnot. I was on edge, and a few minutes later I had all my things and bolted out of that house. Paul called me 2 days later and told me John said he never saw me either. A few years ago, I was home alone at night. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Whenever I hear the doorbell ring, especially when I'm home alone, I am very cautious to answer it. I walked up to the peephole without turning on the porch light, so they don't know if anyone is actually home or not, and I looked through it. It was really dark, but I can see a small figure, more like a black blob. I don't know its definite shape, and had to be around 3 to 4 feet, doing like a dancing motion, dipping down and oscillating its arms outward. Think of a person moving their arms like wings gracefully. It was dark outside, but this figure was darker, so I could see this going on. After a few seconds, I stopped looking through the peephole because it was too freaky to look at. I regained some courage and looked back through it, and whatever it was gone. To this day, I still don't know what that was, and I get freaked out just thinking about it. I'll give you some backstory before I begin. I am 21 years old now, but when this happened, I was only 14. I was home alone. I don't remember why, but I do remember I was on the phone with my friend when downstairs I heard a noise. Confused, I got up from my bed and creaked my bedroom door open. I told my friend to hold on, and I yelled down the stairs, "Guys?" I was assuming I would hear them respond, but I didn't. I didn't hear a thing. I did hear my dog growling downstairs, and thought that's what I must have heard the first time, although it always made me scared when I would hear her growl. It put me on edge. I felt comfort though because my friend was on the phone with me. I went downstairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. As I turned the corner, I saw the door to our basement close. It scared the shit out of me, and I froze where I was standing. My dog was growling outside, looking in at me, and started freaking out when she saw me and started jumping on the glass door. This didn't help and scared me even more. I ran over and let her inside, and she immediately ran to the basement door and started growling at it. That was all I needed to see, and was freaking out to my friend on the phone. I told her I was sure somebody was down there and I was gonna leave. I felt much better when I went outside onto the front lawn and saw my neighbor outside getting his mail. I went over to him, and it was weird because I have never spoke to him until then, and I told him I was sure somebody was in my house. He was very understanding, and he told me to come with him while he grabbed his phone and called my parents. I didn't know he had their number, but I was so glad he did. My mom believed me right away, but my dad took some convincing. I felt bad for ruining their night, but somebody was in our house. I was sure. I sat with my neighbor awkwardly on his front porch, staring at my house. While we waited, I saw the master bedroom light turn on. My neighbor and I flipped out, and he couldn't believe it. When my parents got home, my mom came over to us, and my dad and my neighbor slowly went inside the house. I think they were scared as hell, but neither one said so. They ended up not catching the person, and I was happy, because I was afraid of my dad getting hurt. My dad did say that he thinks he just missed whoever it was. The back door was unlocked the whole time. It was so creepy. I never felt comfortable in that house after that, even when my parents were home. And still I get scared sometimes when I think too much about it. Hey, I'm new to the forum, but I have a really creepy story to share. Around 10 years ago or so, I was working as a pizza delivery driver. I had just turned 18, and it seemed like a good first job for me. So that you can understand the story and my experience better, just know that I am a female, and I'm on the petite side. So I hadn't been working at this pizza place very long before this happened. It was a Saturday night, around 11 o'clock. Why it is okay to have a petite young girl deliver pizzas at this time of night, I have no idea, but I was. I had one delivery to make, at an apartment complex a few miles up our main street. I figured this one would be quick, and I'd probably get a decent tip because I always seem to when delivering to this complex. I went to the apartment number listed on the receipt and knocked. A man answered the door. This man was tall, good-looking, with long brown hair that was kept and combed to the side. If I remember correctly, he was wearing blue jeans and a turtleneck long-sleeve shirt. When he answered, he seemed very happy to see me. He said hello and told me to hang on for a second and kinda closed the door in my face. I assumed he was getting the money when he opened it back up, and I saw another man now, standing near a bedroom door close by. The man had a big smile and was honestly pretty attractive. He asked me to come inside and set the pizza on the table. I looked at his hands, and he wasn't holding any money. I thought this seemed weird, and I didn't trust the situation. I told him I'd just wait here for the payment, and he insisted that I come inside to put the pizza on the table. I told him I was sorry, but I couldn't do that, and he said something like, "It's fine, I'll get your money. Just come in and put it down." I told him I didn't feel comfortable entering people's houses and that it was against our policy anyway. He then stopped smiling and said, "Just come in." I felt scared now and told him I wasn't going in one last time. He then slammed the door in my face, and it scared me even more. I hurried back to my car and drove back to the store. The guy obviously didn't want the pizza. It was very frightening. I wish I could say I quit after that, but I didn't. And I even delivered pizza to that same complex a few more times before I started another job. Thank God I never saw that man or the other guy that was there again. Do you ever have the feeling when you're walking somewhere at night that the person behind you is following you? That happened to me. And not very long ago either. I was walking home from my friend Nicole's house. She only lived like 7 blocks down from my street, but we live in the downtown area of a huge city. I should have known better, but I do now. I was walking, and I could just feel that somebody was behind me at some point. I'm not sure how. Instinct, I guess. I turned around kinda to see who it was, and it was exactly what you don't want to see. A tall man, wearing dark clothes, with his hands in his hoodie pockets. I started picking up my pace because of the natural nervousness it brought me. I thought for sure he wasn't actually following me, but I started to hear his steps when I couldn't before. I turned again and saw that he was walking really fast behind me now, about 30 feet away. I became scared and paranoid and thought, should I actually start running? and after I heard his steps become much faster, I realized he had started running, so I did too. I turned around while running to see him full on sprinting at me. This damn near gave me heart failure. I ran faster and faster. He wasn't gaining speed on me, and I saw the sign of a liquor store fairly close. I heard his steps start to fade as I got closer to it, and I ran inside and up to the counter where the very concerned man that was working there was looking at me. I told him I was sorry, but I thought somebody was following me. I looked out the door, and the man never passed by. I called my boyfriend and told him what just happened to me, and he was pissed. He said he would come get me, and I stood there telling the man at the counter about it too. My boyfriend came in and he said nobody was outside the store. That proved to me that the guy was actually chasing me. I was remodeling a house about a year back down in Memphis. This couple that had hired me on had money, and they were expecting a baby when I first met them. The wife was pretty far along, and it turned out she went into labor only about a week into my work there. I showed up for work the morning after they had gone to the hospital, and the husband left me the key and told me to help myself to anything in their refrigerator, and they probably wouldn't be home for a couple days. So I was putting up drywall in their family room, listening to music. I was trying to keep busy when suddenly I heard something. It sounded like somebody hit a drum. I set the stuff I was holding down and turned down my radio. I didn't hear anything anymore, so I walked over to the foyer and peered down the hallway that led to the master bedroom. I'm not shy, so I hollered out, "Hello?" I got nothing back. Then I heard a door close down the hall. I was looking down the hall when I heard it, and to me it sounded like the door to the master bathroom had opened up. I said hello. Again, I heard nothing. I went back to work, but only a few minutes later I was holding a full sheet of drywall, about to drill it up, when out of the corner of my eye I saw someone. I turned, but they had vanished. I heard them run down the hall. I pretty much dropped what I was holding and said hello again. I was breathing heavy now because I saw a person in the corner of my eye. I was certain. I walked over to the hallway again and looked down. I saw no one and heard nothing. I looked at my watch and it was 6:19. I told myself I was good for the day and walked back over to where I was working. I plugged in my drill charger and slid a battery into it, and I grabbed my keys on the counter and walked outside. I came back to their house the next morning and continued working. Before I did though, I walked down the hallway and checked the rooms. Nobody was there but me. Later on, I asked the husband when they got home who that might have been, and he said he had no idea, that nobody lived there but them. I'm certain I saw somebody in that house. So my wife and I were celebrating 5 years of marriage. We were staying in this nice hotel in Santa Cruz called the Dream Inn. It was September, so it wasn't too hot outside, and not cold either. It was perfect. One night we got back to our hotel from dinner. My wife got in the shower, and I was sitting on the balcony overlooking the ocean. I was drinking a beer and just enjoying the scenery. It was really cool. I could see the ocean from there, the wharf, and the boardwalk. As I was sitting there, a man walked over, and from underneath me he said, "Hey, your wife is gorgeous, sir. You better keep your eye on her." I took offense to this asshole approaching me and saying this, so I just said nothing back. He walked off, and I forgot about it. The next day we were walking along the wharf and saw a nice restaurant we wanted to eat lunch at. We went inside and sat down. I noticed soon after that one of the waiters was being creepy and kept making a point to look over to us as he walked by. My heart skipped a beat when I realized that the waiter was the same guy that was under my balcony the night before. I stared him down and he just smiled at me. It really angered me and, quite frankly, scared me. I told my wife about it and she agreed that we should eat somewhere else. We were only there for one more day, and I didn't see that asshole again, but man, that was creepy. That guy must have been on a lunch break or something and followed us. I have no idea. Hey there. I have to share this with you guys. I think this story would qualify to be on here. I work for a pest management company. I want to remain anonymous and don't want to name my company, but it's a pretty big one in the US. I'm a termite guy, which means I do the really tough work. I have to crawl under houses and spray termite killer on the wooden beams that hold up the house, as well as drill holes in concrete and dig ditches along the perimeter of houses. Not too many scary things can happen, I guess, while doing this job. It's really tough work, but this one day, like 6 months back, I had the surprise of a lifetime. I was working at this really old, run-down place up in the hills in my state, and the woman who lived at the house was really nice. She was an older broad and just wanted her house saved before the termites literally ate the whole thing. So everything was going as it would normally, and I was going under the house in the crawl space to spray. As I was crawling, though, I smelled something really foul. I thought to myself, this smells like nothing I've ever smelled, but it was really strong. Not strong enough to stop me, though, or make me puke or anything, but man, I tell you, it was bad. I was crawling, spraying, and trying not to breathe too much because of the smell. As I crawled, I ran into a body. It was almost completely rotted, but there was still flesh I could see. It felt surreal, honestly. I couldn't believe I had stumbled onto it. It felt like winning the lottery of stumbling onto something so weird. The body was obviously put there, and I became aware that the nice woman I was working for might have committed murder and put this body there. From what I could tell, it was an adult, but I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. I actually called my boss from under the house, and he told me to get out right away and tell the homeowner. I got all detective on him and said I shouldn't tell her, and maybe our company should just call the cops. He said no and insisted that I tell her right then. I did, and she was shocked, asking if I was sure and all that. I told her I was pretty damn sure I had just found a rotting corpse under her house, and she called 911. I left the house without finishing my work, of course, and I wasn't able to find out if she had done it or what the hell the deal was with it all. I looked online, but never found a thing. Sometimes I feel like driving up there to see if her SUV is still parked there. It honestly wasn't too scary after it set in, but when I first saw the corpse, I swear it looked like the skeleton was looking right at me. I work at a pizza joint in Chicago, and I unfortunately have the shitty responsibility of delivering pizzas, usually on the weekends, and usually at night. I've asked my boss for day shifts, but she seems to ignore my requests and give me whatever shifts I don't want the most. I know being a pizza delivery man is somewhat of a dangerous job, but I never imagined anything like what happened to me a few months ago could actually happen. There is this one customer that always calls in and acts strange as hell on the phone. Sometimes he will just hang up on you. Sometimes he'll order pizzas normally, but make crazy sounds while he does, and then hang up. We've always thought this guy was just an idiot playing pranks. He would make really weird comments too, like, I want to order a large pizza with pineapples, mustard, and your skin. I'll never forget that one. We usually just hang up on his ass now, and we always know it's him calling because his number is saved in our system. So he called again a few months ago and ordered a pizza normally, no bullshit, no weird comments or sounds, and gave his address too. I thought it would be interesting to finally deliver to this guy, and when I drove up to his house, it was something you'd see in a scary movie. An old as hell looking place right on the line where we don't deliver, not in the busy part of the city where most of our orders come in. The house looked like it was about 100 years old, and there were no lights on that I could see. I wasn't scared or anything, just looking forward to seeing what he looked like. When I went to the front door, I rang the bell, but it wasn't working, so I knocked. I realized I forgot the guy's soda, and thought he'd give me shit for sure, or just freak out on me. Nobody answered right away, so I knocked again on this big door. He opened up after that second time. He was wearing this weird-looking mask around his mouth. Only his mouth. His eyes were opened wide, and I told him how much the pizza was, and that I was sorry I forgot the drink. He looked down, I think, and then said it's okay, and then looked at me again. I stood there looking at him for like 5 seconds in silence when I got bored of his shit and told him the amount again. He said okay, and then asked me, has anyone ever attacked me before? I told him no, and if they did, they'd be sorry. He then took off his mask that was covering his mouth, and he had big-ass scars all around his mouth. I have no idea what they were from, and can't even imagine what they might have been from, but he looked seriously messed up. He smiled at me, and his lips were all cracked. I noticed he wasn't about to hand me some money, so I told him I was leaving. I turned around and started walking down the steps, and he screamed at me and slammed the door. This bastard was crazy, and I don't think any of his shit was to be funny. That final scream he gave me was creepy as hell, even though I kind of expected him to do something like that. He has called several times since then, and we always just tell him now that he is on our no delivery list. He usually just screams and hangs up, or cusses out whoever is on the phone. Hello. I want to share a scary story that happened to me when I was 10 years old. It happened at my house in the middle of the night. I woke up to get some water, as I usually did. I walked out of my bedroom and went down the stairs. My house was 2 stories, but really it was 3 if you count the set of stairs you have to climb to reach the front door and the back door. So this was my usual routine. I would wake up somewhere around 2 a.m. and go downstairs to get water. I would stand in the kitchen and drink while looking out the back window and down at our backyard. I always did this and would imagine how scary it would be if I saw somebody back there. This one night, I did see someone back there. As I was drinking my water, I saw a figure standing against the fence in the back of the yard. I didn't know what they were doing or if they were looking at me, but they were dressed in all black. I stood there frozen with fear until the person started moving. They started walking nonchalantly across my backyard. It was terrifying to see. They were walking over to the wooden steps to get to the back door. I ducked down and ran back up the stairs as fast as I could. I tried opening my dad's bedroom door, but it was locked. I knocked and knocked. It took forever for him to finally say, "Yeah." I tried whispering that somebody was in our backyard, but also loud enough to where he could hear me. Nothing happened, so I repeated myself a little bit louder. He finally opened the door and I started crying. I told him I saw a person in our backyard. He told me to go in his room, and I did, while he went down the stairs. I waited for a minute and couldn't handle it, so I left his room and slowly started going down the stairs again. Before I could reach the bottom, he turned the corner and scared me, saying nobody was back there. I told him I saw somebody for sure walking towards the door, and he went back over to the kitchen to look out the window. We both looked out and saw nothing, saw nobody. After him asking me numerous times if I was sure, he called the police. They arrived pretty fast, and they checked our backyard, the front yard, everywhere, but didn't find anyone. We went back to sleep and nothing else happened. For some reason, the person didn't try to enter our house. I'll never forget seeing that person back there though, and I still can't look out my windows at night. I was home alone one night when I was a teen. Everything was fine until I woke up in the middle of the night to get some water. I walked out of my room, down the stairs, and as soon as I hit the bottom landing, I I saw that there was a figure sitting in the old chair in our living room. I stood there for a few seconds, completely in shock and terror. The person sitting there began to move and stand up. I turned and fled back up the stairs. I ran back into my room and slammed and locked my door. Completely in tears, I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the door. My dad appeared at my door not 10 seconds after I closed it and asked why I just slammed my door and what was going on. I opened up for him, and in between my sobs, I told him I saw somebody downstairs. I asked if it was him, and he said no, that he had just come from his bedroom right next to mine. It was just the two of us living there. He checked the house and found nobody except an old-looking business card for this hotel in our city. It was tucked between the cushions of the chair. He checked into it, but nothing became of it to my knowledge. It was the scariest night of my life. This happened on a Friday. I was in high school, and I had just walked home after school. I walked into my house, and my parents weren't home yet. This was typical. They got off work at 5, and I was always home alone for a couple hours after school. I was sitting in my bedroom, watching TV. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and my bedroom door was open. As I was watching, someone walked by my bedroom very fast and scared the living shit out of me. I'm an only child, and I knew that whoever had just walked by was not supposed to be in my house. I got up and thought about jumping out of my bedroom window. I was very creeped out and decided that was probably the best idea. I opened my window and crawled out. Luckily, my bedroom was on the first floor, and when I hit the grass, I turned around and looked up at my window, mortified that I'd see somebody standing there, or somebody about to jump out after me. Relief. Nobody was there. I ran to the gate, and the damned lock was so old and rusted, it made so much noise trying to undo the damn thing to open it. I got it open after making so much noise and ran to the street and started going down the sidewalk. I stopped, and my heart sank when I realized I had changed my pants into gym shorts when I got home, and my cell phone was still in my jeans pocket. There was no way I was going back inside, but I did start walking back toward my house, and when I reached it, I stopped and tried to see somebody through my front window. Of course, I didn't. I walked up to my front door and very quietly opened it. It creaked open very slowly, and as soon as the door stopped, after hitting the closet door behind it, I heard somebody say, "Get out." I sprinted away and called my dad at the grocery store that was kind of close to our house. He came to the store to pick me up, and I told him we should call the cops, but he wasn't afraid, and he just walked right into the house when we got home. Nobody was in there, and he assured me that he checked everywhere. I only went inside when he said he was 100% sure there was nobody inside the house. Early the next morning, I woke up because my bedroom was freezing. I sat up, and my window was wide open. It was winter, and there was no way in hell I would leave it open the way it was. I told my dad, but he of course didn't really believe me. My mom seemed a bit creeped out because she could see how serious I was. Whoever had walked by my bedroom was still in there. They were in my room while I slept. When I was 24 years old, I experienced something so strange, so scary, that I just had to write about it and share it with the world. It is absolutely true and was the scariest thing that has ever happened in my life. I was traveling at the time, going to visit my best friend who had moved a few states away from me to go to college. One day, I was driving in Ohio, if I remember correctly. I was on a long highway that stretched across the state when out of nowhere my car died. I shifted to the side of the road where I eventually came to a stop. I didn't run out of gas. I had just filled up at the last town. I tried starting my car, and I was very happy when it actually started. I was confused and was worried about why the hell it just died on me. As I started to pick up speed and get back on track, my car started making weird noises, and it sounded like something was grinding on something else. I looked up and saw a sign that showed that there was a gas station and food at the next exit. My car was moving, but with this grinding noise, I decided to get off the highway and take a look at it at the gas station. There were only 2 places off this exit that I could see, a gas station with 1 pump and an old-looking diner not too far off next to it. I pulled into the gas station and it looked closed. I checked my watch and quickly realized this was strange as hell. It was only 2:30 p.m. What kind of gas station closes before this time? I got out of my car and approached the glass door entrance to the station. I put my hands up and cupped the glass around my eyes to see inside. The place looked abandoned. It was obvious nobody was there, and I turned and looked around me. I felt a bit uneasy at this moment when I saw that no other people or cars were around me. What the hell? Where am I? I checked my phone and of course, I had no service. I looked up at the sky and it was white. The clouds were moving fiercely and it was cold as hell outside. I decided to get back in my car and drive it over to the diner. When I reached this place, I thought for sure it was closed as well. But to my surprise, before I could even reach the door after getting out of my car, an old woman opened the door to the place and greeted me with a smile. She looked nice, and I was so relieved to see somebody else and maybe get some hot food in my stomach. She said hello and asked if it was just me, did I want a booth, blah blah blah. I told her yes, it was only me, and a booth sounded fine. This diner looked very old-fashioned, and there was no other customers inside. The woman showed me to my seat, and I scooted into the booth. I looked up at her, and she was wearing an old apron with stains all over it. Her teeth were old, cracked, and yellow. She had a pleasant voice, though, and she seemed to be a very nice person. She handed me a menu and asked what I'd like to drink. I told her a Coke or Pepsi would be great, and she smiled and said she'd be right back. I sat there looking at this menu, and there was dirt on it. It looked like it had been sitting outside for years. I cleaned it off, and the food that was on it that was available was very basic. Burger, chicken sandwich, fries, salad. That was pretty much it. I decided to order the burger with some fries. A few minutes passed, and she hadn't returned with my drink yet. I was anxious to ask her if there was a mechanic around that could look at my car. A few more minutes passed, and I started thinking, what the hell is going on back there? I yelled out, "Hello?" in as nice a voice as possible. I got no response. At this point, I was annoyed, and I got up. I walked over to the door that led into the back cooking area and swung it open, about to ask where my drink was. To my surprise, the back of the diner was empty. There was no cooks, no fryers, no grills, nothing. The woman was nowhere in sight. It was obvious that this diner was not a running establishment, and I felt sick to my stomach. I started to walk into the back area when I heard the scariest, most evil old lady laugh I've ever heard. I stopped and backed up out the door into the front. I turned and walked out the door I came in from. I ran down the 3 steps and over to my car and got inside. Thank God my car started, and I floored it out of there. As I was driving away, I looked into my rearview mirror and saw the woman standing in the middle of the road. I spent the night at my girlfriend's house one night and had to leave really early in the morning to go to work. So early, it was still dark outside when I left, and would be for a few more hours. She lived in a rural town about 60 miles from my house and work, and when I got in my car and started driving, there wasn't the usual street lights lining the roads to guide me. The only light came from my headlights. About 10 miles into my drive, my car started to slow down and eventually came to a stop. I first checked my gas, and it was almost full. I'm not very car trouble savvy, so I dug my phone out of my jacket pocket and swiped the screen. Nothing happened. I realized that my phone was dead, and immediately after that, I came to the realization that I had forgot to plug it in last night before we went to sleep. So here I was, stuck in my car, on the side of a rural street, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I started thinking of things to do. I could start walking. No. Bad idea. It was dark as hell out here, and I wouldn't be able to see anything while walking. And on top of that, somebody could hit me. I concluded the only thing I could do was sit in my car and wait for daylight, which is a very stressful and scary thing to have to come to terms with. It was winter, and I started getting cold. I tried starting my car over and over, to no avail. I gave up and crossed my arms. I sat in the dark car on the dark street for about 10 minutes just looking into the darkness in front of me before I squinted my eyes and noticed somebody walking toward my car directly in front of me. They were about 30 yards away. The only thing I could see was the outline of their body. They stopped walking right after I noticed them. I got really scared and just gazed at this outline for the longest time. In a sudden movement, they started walking again, but fast. In a few seconds, they reached my driver's side door and tried opening it. Did they think the car was empty? Holy hell, did they see me in here? I leaned away from the door and window onto the center console. After failing to open my locked door, they stood there for a moment and then very suddenly turned and walked away in the direction they came from. I was so confused and creeped out at this. Why would they walk back that way, the way they came? I sat there in the dark wondering what just happened, when all of the sudden, I saw 2 headlights come on in front of me. The car was parked on the same side of the road as mine, but facing me. Had the person stopped when they saw my car? What would they do next? How did I not see them stop there? After a few moments, they started their engine and turned their car around, driving off down the road. A few hours later, the sun was rising, and a truck stopped next to me and asked if I was having trouble. I asked if I could use their cell phone, and with it, I called my girlfriend, who picked me up soon after.
I met a college girl that I was living with in a defunct fraternity house. They had lost their charter for reasons I didn't first know. We fell for each other, and I moved in with her. It was a great apartment complex with pool tables and giant showers. One night when we were drunk, she took me to a room that was empty. It had 2 bunk beds, and above one bed was a secret door. It led to an upstairs room where most of the hazing took place. The story goes that one night during a party, in the dead of winter, a girl was raped by some frat boys. They just left her up there in the cold, and she ended up dying from freezing to death. One of the frat boys was so distraught by the incident that he went up there one day and painted her picture on the wall, then hung himself from the rafters. Whilst we were up there, I could swear that the eyes on the picture would follow you around the room, and there were reports of crying coming from up there some nights. I never went up there again. This happened ages ago, when I used to babysit. I was maybe 13 at the time, living in the countryside, and was babysitting most of the children on my street, which was around 20 houses. This particular neighbour would love to go out on Wednesday, because there would always be this Latin dance class that was going on in a nearby bar. So I was used to babysitting for her and knew that she'd always come back very late. That specific night, the oldest of I studied my maths a little, and around midnight decided to take a nap until the kid's mum came back. A few minutes after falling asleep, I hear someone frantically knocking on the door trying to